Once upon a time, there was a beautiful yet sad kingdom filled with unhappy townsfolk. Their days were filled with stress. They had a very hard time finding meaning in their lives. They felt isolated from each other. Everything seemed upside down. They lived, but nothing made sense. To combat this, some went to their local sorcerer who would give them happy pills. Others would go to taverns and drink happy juice. They tried everything they could to feel better. These things would give them short breaks from their cares, but then their worries always came back redoubled in their force. All they wanted was to feel better. It made no difference how. The king in this land was a bad man, supported by a group of evil cohorts. The king and his cohorts encouraged the townsfolk to fight among themselves constantly. Everybody was encouraged to be hypersensitive and view their neighbors as threats. They did all they could to keep the townsfolk unhappy and in a state of insecurity, while all the time lining their own pockets with gold. They were never satisfied. It was a sad kingdom indeed. One day the town herald began to cry out startling news. It seemed that an invisible monster was on its way to ravage the kingdom. The king went to the public square and told the townsfolk they needed to get together in face of this awful invisible monster. He told them that sacrifices were needed, that they were in a war. He announced that from now on, everything was going to change. Next, he announced the first victim. The invisible monster had attacked a famous movie star. This terrified the townsfolk. If the invisible monster had no respect for movie stars, just think what it might do to them. But the king had some good news. The great wizard had discovered that if the townsfolk wore a piece of magic cloth over their mouth and nose, that scared the invisible monster away. Also, it was discovered that the invisible monster liked cafes, museums, concert halls, and cinemas, but that it didn't like the subway or the bus. Further, it only attacked townsfolk in groups, so townsfolk were told to stay as far away from each other as possible, when they weren't in the bus or the subway, of course. Using the town herald, the king proclaimed all sorts of different things, so many, in fact, that it became confusing. But the diligent townsfolk didn't seem to notice. Then a few days later, the king made a grand proclamation. For their own good, the townsfolk would have to stay inside their houses until the invisible monster went away. Strangely, at hearing that they were to be locked inside their houses, many of the townsfolk started feeling better. It seemed to give them some purpose in their otherwise anxious lives. It gave them the feeling of being part of a group, even though they were even more isolated than before. They prepared to stay inside, and first, fearing both an unwiped ass and potential starvation, they rushed out and bought endless rolls of toilet paper and giant baskets of food. There were fights in the aisles of the stores between the nervous and agitated townsfolk. And then, after collecting their supplies, the townsfolk went inside their houses and locked the doors. Staying inside their houses led to unforeseen consequences: suicides, child and spousal abuse, economic ruin for many of the kingdom's citizens. But the scared townsfolk didn't seem to care, for they felt that anything justified keeping the invisible monster away. Besides, the town herald never mentioned these things, while constantly announcing the seemingly unending destruction caused by the invisible monster. Meanwhile, the evil cohorts of the king were becoming richer and richer, but no one seemed to take notice. These evil cohorts, to amuse themselves, even started taking trips into space. The townsfolk stayed inside their houses on and off for about a year. Later on, a curfew was put in place when it was discovered that the invisible monster only came out after 7 p.m. Then one fine day the great wizard in the kingdom announced that he had discovered a magic potion that would destroy the invisible monster. No one knew what was in it, but the king said, "What's good enough for the grand wizard is good enough for me." Townsfolk were overjoyed and started to drink the potion. Many townsfolk died or became terribly ill, but again, this was seen as a small price to pay to destroy the invisible monster. And as usual, the town herald never mentioned any of this in his daily reports. A special monster card was created which it was promised would also keep the dreaded invisible monster away from anyone who held it. To get this special card, one had to drink the magic potion. By this time, the people, having accepted so much already, thought, well, why not? In fact, many of them began to like all the arbitrary rules that were made up, later changed, then reinstated. It was fun. In any case, a lot more fun than being stressed out as they were before. Then, a little later, the great wizard announced that the magic potion didn't work quite as well as he thought it would. This was because the chameleon-like invisible monster was so clever, and that there was a new magic potion they needed to take. And probably, he said, there would be many new magic potions as time went on. Next it was announced that the invisible monster had changed into an even more deadly invisible monster. The townsfolk again were terrified. Then it changed again. Would it never stop? Now, from the very beginning, there had been a few townsfolk who thought that the invisible monster wasn't as deadly as the king had said. It seemed to them that it was an expression of people's anxiety and the opportunistic work of the king and his evil cohorts. These townsfolk were laughed at and scoffed. The king and his evil cohorts gave orders to the town herald never to repeat anything they said in the public square. In some places in the kingdom, they were locked up in their house, even forced to drink the magic potion or lose their jobs. Sometimes they were even placed in special camps. Others openly called for their banishment, and not a few townsfolk wished them simply to be dispatched with, not caring by what means. The townsfolk didn't like to listen to these people, for it meant returning to what they were before, anxiety-ridden townsfolk without direction. The invisible monster gave them a feeling of purpose. Other townsfolk just didn't want to stick their neck out, so even though they had doubts about what was happening, they just went along with it, drank the magic potion, and used the monster card. And that's how it goes in the sad kingdom. And the ending to this fairy tale? Will the king and his evil cohorts triumph in their game of fear? Or will the brave townsfolk get together and expose them for what they really are, drive them out, and make the sad kingdom into a happy land once again? Well, that's up to you.